At first it seemed empty, but as we got in farther, we could see a large blond man, Wojtek Frykowski, asleep on a sofa that faced into the room, away from the door, and was incongruously draped with a large American flag. As we stood over him, I whispered to Sadie to check the rest of the house. I went into 2 bedrooms, walked past one room, and saw a woman sitting wearing glasses reading a book. She looked at me, held her glasses down, and waved. I looked at her and waved my hand and smiled. I continued down the hall and came to another bedroom. A very pretty, pregnant woman was in bed, and a man was sitting on the bed. They were talking. They turned out to be Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring. Miss Tate and her visitor continued to talk, apparently not seeing me. Walking back toward the living room, I waved at the Folger woman again and reported to Tex. Tex was in front of the couch, and there was a man lying on the couch. Pat and I moved around behind the couch, and Tex, a long .22 caliber revolver in one hand and a knife in the other, stood in front. A coil of rope was slung over his shoulder. Pointing the gun at the man's head, he said sharply but not loudly, "Wake up." The man stretched his arms and woke up. Frykowski stirred at the sound of my voice and mumbled something like, "What time is it?" I kicked him in the head as he struggled up in confusion, mumbling, "Who are you? What do you want?" I answered, "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." He said, "My money is in the wallet on the desk," and Tex told me to go over and look at the desk. I went over and looked at the desk, and I didn't see a wallet, and I told Tex I didn't see one. Still holding the gun on the man, Tex told me to get something to tie his hands. He obviously had other uses for the rope still coiled over his shoulder. I looked all over the living room and went into several others. All I could find was a towel. I grabbed it and rushed back. Tex looked at me rather exasperatedly and told me to tie the man's hands. I did the best I could with the towel, but I knew it wasn't very secure. I stood back, and Tex instructed me to go back and get the other 3 people. I jerked my head to Sadie, and she disappeared down the hall. Frykowski started to say something else, but I cut him off. "Another word, and you're dead." I walked back down the hall to the far bedroom where the man and woman were talking, only this time I burst into the room with my knife thrust out in front of me. I surprised them, and they seemed rattled. "Come with me," I said evenly. "Don't say a word, or you're dead." Walking behind, I herded them down the hall, and taking them into the Folger woman's bedroom, I ordered her to follow. I held the knife menacingly in my right hand, although I write with my left, and my costume and bold manner obviously intimidated them. I said, "Get up and go into the living room. Don't ask me any questions. Just do what I say." She then proceeded to get up out of bed and walk down the hall and was met by Katie. She brought back Abigail Folger first, a dark-haired woman in a long white nightgown. Katie held a knife on her while Sadie went back for the other 2. When she looked helplessly to Frykowski, he shook his head slightly, and she said nothing. I stood to the left of the door and told them both to get up and go into the living room. He said, "What are you doing here?" Sadie returned with the other man, Jay Sebring, and a blonde woman in bra and panties with a negligee thrown over her shoulders. She was Sharon Tate. Somehow I didn't notice she was in the last stages of pregnancy. Sharon hesitated at the entrance to the living room, and I leapt forward and grabbed her arm, jerking her in after Sadie and Sebring, while I flipped off the hall light with my elbow. Avoid fingerprints, my mind had clicked. When Sebring turned back, protesting my roughness, I told him as I had Frykowski that if he said one more word he would die. "He means it," Frykowski warned from the sofa. In the living room, Tex told all of them to line up in front of the fireplace. At that, Sharon Tate started crying. Tex ordered them all to lie down on their stomachs. Sharon said something to the effect that she is pregnant. "Shut up," Tex shouted. Tex tied up Jay Sebring and Abigail Folger and Sharon. I'd already tied Frykowski's hands behind him with one end of the rope we'd brought, and now I dragged the rope over to Sebring and tied him, while Sadie tied a towel around Frykowski's wrists, according to my instructions. I wrapped a rope around Sebring's neck and then slung it up over one of the rafters that ran across the room and supported aloft above the fireplace. Tex took the rope he had brought and tied it around the necks of all three. He threw the end over one of the living room beams and pulled it tight, forcing each of them to stand erect or choke. When I started to tie the rope around Sharon's neck, Sebring struggled forward in the chair he was seated in beside the fireplace, shouting for me to be careful of her. Sebring looked hard at Tex. "Can't you see she's pregnant?" She was very pregnant, and with the bikini panties and flimsy top she was wearing, it showed plainly. Sebring stepped toward Tex and started to reach for him. "I told you one more word and you're dead," I screamed and shot him. Tex turned the gun and shot him twice. He fell over in front of the fireplace, dead or dying. As he slumped forward onto the rug, still alive, Sharon became hysterical, but the Folger woman seemed anxious to cooperate, as if somehow she could bring sanity into the madness simply by maintaining her own control. The Tate woman screamed, but then quieted into sobbing and weeping. "I want all the money you've got here," I barked. The Folger woman spoke first. "I have some credit cards." I moved swiftly and grabbed her, holding my knife to her abdomen. I walked her to her bedroom. "Please don't hurt me," she sobbed. "You can have everything." "Shut up," I spoke fiercely to her. Abigail Folger walked into the bedroom. She reached into her purse and pulled out a wallet and said, "I only have $72. I just went to the bank yesterday," and asked me if I wanted any of her credit cards, and I shook my head no. I took the money and put it in my pocket and walked her back to the living room. When I came back with only $70, I shouted, "You mean that's all you got?" "Is this all you have?" Tex demanded. "Yes," she sobbed. "How much do you want?" Frykowski asked. "We want thousands." Sharon had pulled herself together enough to say that they didn't have any more money in the house, but that they could get us some if we'd give them time. "You know I'm not kidding," I asked, and she murmured, "Yes, I know." Sebring was breathing hard, groaning, and in the sudden silence I didn't know what else to do. I went over to him and stabbed him until I thought he was dead. The women began to scream, and someone asked, "What are you going to do with us?" Tex's stony eyes passed from one to another. "Prepare to die." Then he told Sharon and Abigail to lie down next to him, and told Katie to turn off all the lights, and the lights went out. There was still enough light from the outside lights so that we could see on the inside. I looked over and I saw a dog in the window. The dog ran away. They began pleading with us for their lives, and suddenly Frykowski started kicking and fighting, jerking at the towel that bound his hands. Tex, looking vicious and cruel yet blank and pale, turned to him. "Kill him." He motioned toward Frykowski. "Kill him," I ordered Sadie. I raised my knife to plunge it into his chest, but my hand would not come down. The seconds flashed by. I yelled, "Tex, I can't do it." There was a force there that held my wrist, and I couldn't move. And as he saw that I couldn't move, and he very easily undid the ties, the towel that I tied his wrists with, and he and I began to fight. Suddenly Frykowski, still tied about the neck, but free of the towel around his hands, grabbed me and we began to struggle. Apparently the rope over the beam pulled loose, and we fell to the floor rolling and twisting. I was fighting wildly, but was aware that Pat and the Folger woman had begun to struggle also. There were screams, yells, curses, wrestling, stabbing, and kicking as a desperate fight for life was waged in that luxurious house of horror in the hills of Bel Air. It was total chaos. Frykowski grabbed me by the hair and pulled desperately, violently, literally tearing it out by the roots. He had me from behind, and I flailed wildly with my knife, stabbing him over and over in the legs. Blood was everywhere, and above everything, I could hear Sharon Tate crying, sobbing. He dragged her down as she flailed at him awkwardly with the knife, stabbing him in the legs several times. Then she had lost the knife in the cushions, and Frykowski was loose, tearing her hair and pulling her down onto the floor. The fighting with Frykowski probably lasted only 30 seconds, but it seemed like an eternity until Tex jumped in and began to battle Frykowski too. I would have shot him, but he and Sadie kept rolling and fighting, so I finally threw myself on him and beat him over the head with the butt of the gun until it broke, a section of the grip dropping to the floor. He hit him over the head several times with the gun. I heard the crack of bone. I thought he was surely dead. Then he got away. He started running towards the front door, which was open, and screaming bloody murder, yelling for his life, for somebody to come help him. He was enormously powerful, fighting for his life as he dragged the two of us across the hall toward the front door, knocking over the trunks. I heard a man scream out, "No, no." Then I just heard screams. I started to run toward the house because I wanted them to stop. But he struggled on and finally broke free, running out of the house and onto the lawn screaming. Susan chased Wojtek to the front porch, where they encountered Linda. There was a man just coming out of the door, and he had blood all over his face, and he was standing by a post, and we looked into each other's eyes for a minute, and I said, "Oh God, I'm so sorry. Please make it stop." And then he just fell to the ground into the bushes. He had blood all over his face, and he looked right into my eyes, and he was dying. I felt that he was dying because of me. Sadie came running out of the house, and I said, "Sadie, please make it stop." And then I said, "I hear people coming." And she said, "It is too late." And then she told me that she left her knife, and she couldn't find it. Susan later claimed that she meant she would have tried to stop what was happening, except that she no longer had her knife to protect herself from Watson and Krenwinkel. "Give me your knife," I yelled. "I've lost mine." Apparently Linda did give me her knife, for I soon had another one. My own turned out to have fallen between cushions on the couch, and was to be found by police the next day. A reminder that Linda had already given Pat Krenwinkel her knife, as Pat's handle was broken and taped. Suddenly Tex burst out the front door, following Susan and Frykowski. As they raced and clawed their way out of the living room, my burning mind recorded a scene I'd never forget. It was a picture of my good friend Tex, a gun in one hand and a knife in the other, both arms extended, and a terrible mixture of scream and laughter coming out of his wide-stretched mouth. He was 4 feet off the floor, suspended in the air, a man possessed, driven. In that flash, I knew Tex was not a human being. While this was going on, the man had gotten up, and I saw Tex on top of him, hitting him on the head and stabbing him, and the man was struggling. As we staggered out onto the front porch, he kept screaming, "Help me! Oh God, help me!" I stabbed him over and over, blindly, the whole world spinning and turning as red as the blood that was smearing and spattering everywhere. Finally, I shot him twice, and he slumped onto the stone porch. I looked up and realized Linda was standing on the walk, staring at me in horror. Pat was inside, alone with Sharon and Abigail when Tex went after Frykowski. Abigail took this opportunity to try to escape. Susan came back inside the house as Katie was fighting with Folger. Abigail Folger started to get herself undone, and she took off, and at that point in time, I left and followed her. I ran after her with an upraised knife, and we went out through the back door, and I ran her down, and I began to stab her. Sharon was starting to get loose from the rope, and the Folger girl already had broken loose and was fighting with Katie. I was just standing there watching. I went over and got Sharon and put her in a headlock. She didn't fight me. At times, it seemed so easy. When she began begging me to let her go so she could have her baby, and wow, I realized she was pregnant. Katie was calling for me to help her because Abigail was bigger than Katie, and Katie had long hair which she was pulling. So I called to Tex to do something. Jay Sebring? He appeared to be dead, lying on the floor, although I heard moaning. I don't know whether it came from Jay Sebring or not. Linda was still near the front porch after Tex attacked Frykowski in the yard, and she watched as Abigail ran out from the back of the house, followed by Katie. As Frykowski sank down on the flagstones, Sadie yelled that someone was getting away. I looked across the lawn and saw Abigail Folger dashing toward the fence with Katie behind her, knife raised. Blood was already streaking the white nightgown. I saw a woman in a white dress, and she had blood all over her, and she was screaming, and she was calling for her mom. And I saw Katie stabbing her. I remember her saying, "I'm already dead." I ran across the grass as Katie tackled her. Suddenly, she stopped fighting. Looking up at me as she lay on her back, she whispered without emotion, "I give up. You got me." It was as if my hand and the knife were one, plunging up and down. I felt nothing. Inside the house, Susan remained with the frantic Sharon Tate. Both could see and hear the mayhem outside as Tex and Katie killed Abigail. There was a lot of confusion going on, and I sat there and held her while Tex went over to help Katie. At this time, Tex ordered Katie to go to the back of the property where the guest cottage was to see if anyone was there, and if so, to kill them. I just turned and ran to the car down at the bottom of the hill. I thought about going to a house. There was lights down the road, and I was going to do that, and I said, "No, don't do that, because they'll find me, and they'll go there, and they'll kill all those people." So I went down the hill and got into the car, and I stayed there, and I waited. I just stayed there and waited. Meanwhile, Katie walked toward the guest house behind the pool. When I looked around at the caretaker's cottage, I knew this is wrong. It was like an echo from way back that said, "Wait a minute. This had gone into total madness, but you're a part of this horrendous dance," and it was like, no matter what or anywhere I turned, it wasn't going to stop. Frykowski had somehow managed to drag himself off the porch and was struggling across the lawn. I ran back to him, and once more, the mechanical knife that was my arm drove down again and again until my wrist disappeared in the mess.